is June 22nd, 2009. I am Andrea Mott. It is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Dickinson, North Dakota. Can you please state your full name?
Alexander Hutmacher.
And when and where were you born?
I was born November 2nd, 1950 in the Dickinson Hospital there.
Have you ever heard an interesting story about your birth?
I guess I was born late. It took longer till I was born than they had anticipated, but my mom was in town here with my aunt, and when I finally was born, they said, well, it was just that I was born a few days later than they anticipated I was supposed to be, so.
And was a doctor present?
Yes.
And can you please share some of your earliest memories with us?
About what?
About the earliest thing you remember. Could be anything.
I guess growing up and starting school, and basically I started school at a pretty young age because going to country school out there, I don't think they had the laws and all that they got now, so I was pretty young when I started school.
How old would you say you were?
I was probably about 5.
And how long did you attend country school?
For about 5 years.
And did you ever have any homework that you would have to take home and do?
Not so much on country school, but when we went to town, then there was some homework that we had to take home.
And what was school like in town?
Well, it was quite different because there was more kids and up in with the higher grade, and there was different. You learn different things as well as from the schooling that my parents had towards when I went. If I asked them how to do a problem or something, a lot of times my mom would come up with the answer, but he worked in a total different way than what I knew how. So.
And what was your favorite subject in school?
I guess arithmetic.
And were there any activities that you were involved in?
We usually had, like when I went to school, there was like your softball teams that we always had, and in winter time we played fox and goose and tag and anti over the pool house. And
what was the fox and goose game?
That was usually one of us would go up early in the morning and make a track through the snow, and then when you'd play it, you chased somebody, and then we'd usually put a few dead ends in there, which nobody knew where they were, and when you'd chase them into a dead end, they couldn't get out, and then they were caught, and they had to be it then. So you couldn't jump from one line to the other. You just always had to go in a straight line. So.
Is that something you would play at school? Or
yes,
home?
mostly at school.
And while you were in school, did you ever do anything like theater or?
No.
Nothing like that?
Was in a few Christmas plays in the country school, and in Kilder School I was in the choir. But.
And what was involved with those Christmas plays?
I remember I think I was in the first grade or something. I had to sing Silent Night in German. I sang the first verse of that. My dad played it on the accordion. And also I started the Christmas program, and then at the end of it I had to say a little verse and thanking all the people that came, as well as part of the little verse was, we're sure glad that everyone came and enjoyed themselves, and we hope that you enjoyed it, and we can't wait until we come to the end, because we were all very nervous doing it. So.
How old were you then?
Probably about 5 or 6.
And you said your dad played the accordion. Was he quite a musician?
Yes, he did have his own little band. Him and I think I think there was 2 other neighbors that would play with him.
And did he learn from anyone in his family?
No, he just basically learned to play by ear. So.
And
They used to play like for barn dances and stuff like that around in the neighborhood area.
Would you be able to attend these barn dances as well?
No, by the time I grew up, he had already quit that. When my sisters were born and all, I guess. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but they played in Kildare one night, and then the snowstorm came up, and it took him 2 days to get home. And after that, they decided they best not do it no more because my mother and the girls were at home, and there was nobody there to feed the cattle or anything. So that's why they just basically it deteriorated. So
Did he want any of you children to play an instrument?
he was after me a little bit, but I would have liked to learn. And after he did pass away, I did try. One time I was gonna get myself an accordion, but it was pretty expensive. So, and then I had to have lessons to learn how to play it, and I just sort of forgot about it then. So.
Now, did you go to high school at all there? Or
No.
When did you,
I started high school in Kildare, but then things didn't work out, and I dropped out, and I quit. And then, actually, I quit the fall of '68, and then the spring of '69, my mother passed away. So I'd have pretty much had to quit anyway. So.
And what kind of things did you do at home after your mother passed away?
I had to I learned how to bake bread from scratch, and had to cook the meals and clean the house and learned how to wash clothes, and basically done all the chores that the housewives do as of today. So
And did you have a specialty as far as your food skills?
I made the German potato salad, which I was noted to do. Everybody liked it, and I did make chicken noodle soup quite often, which was also a favorite of many of the neighbors and relatives that would come.
Now, is that a traditional German Russian dish?
Yes, I would say so.
And like to did your sisters, when you were growing up, and a couple of your sisters that were still home, did they ever help your mother cooking the meals?
Oh, I'm sure they did. I know they always help with the dishes and all, and I'm sure they helped her cook too.
Did any of them, do any of them still use your mother's recipes?
Oh, yes, they do.
And where would they store the food to keep it cool during the summers?
We had a root cellar.
And where was that?
That was just a little west of where the buildings were, and then it was made out with rock, and there was a stone steps going down, and then a sod roof over it, and a wooden door on the outside. There was all your pickles and beets and the carrots. They were in earthen crocks, and pretty much, I guess anything that we had canned was down there. So.
And did your mother have a big garden?
Yes, they usually had a pretty good sized garden, as well as planted a lot of potatoes. We always had our own potatoes.
And what was the canning process your mother would use to preserve these goods?
Well, usually like with the tomatoes, she'd boil them and put them in the jars, and I don't remember what all she put in there, but then it was sealed. And like pickles was the same thing. You put them in, and there was your salt put in, and dill and vinegar, and filled with water and sealed up, and they were always real good, delicious pickles.
And how many would she make?
I would say on a good year, there was probably about 40, 50 quarts.
And would that last you all winter?
Just for the whole season till we got some again. So.
And what about fruit trees or berry bushes? Were there any of those on the property?
We did have some chokecherry trees, and I think that was pretty much all. There was some bullberry trees, but they were usually pretty sour. But the chokecherry, I remember, they were always picked and made chokecherry jelly out of it. So.
And what was the jelly process? How would your mother go about making jelly?
They were boiled, I guess, and then they had to be pitted, and and then they crushed them up and sealed, and then when it was, we liked it like real runny, and then we'd a lot of times add our own cream into it and make like a, I don't know, like a something that we dipped our homemade baked bread into it. So
And what about any other trees on the property? Were there trees on the property when you were growing up?
yeah, there was in the creek. We, like I said, where the beams for the buildings were gotten from. There was about 3/4 of a mile to the west, but there was here and there a few trees along where the coal mines were too, straight west of the buildings.
And you mentioned once before that you had to carry the water in. Was that usually your job?
After I got a little older, yes, and before that, my sisters had to carry it as well as my dad did too. But when I grew up, then it was more or less my job to carry it all.
And how often would you have to go fill up your canisters?
Oh, at least twice a day, most of the time.
And you mentioned your family brought in coal for the winters. How many trips to town would they have to make to pick up the coal?
Usually, when it was hauled in, they'd bring it by the big truckload. So it was about 2 truckloads. And when my dad mined it himself, it was just it was mined, and that wasn't too far away. So it was just all hauled in and brought over with a wagon. So.
Now, growing up, was your family religious?
Yes,
And what church was it that your family attended?
St. Edward's Catholic Church, a mile to the north of where our buildings were.
And what were the seating arrangements like at St. Edward's?
When I grew up, the children all sat in front, and the men on one side, and the ladies on the other side. And then later on in years, the parents sat together and was mixed in the benches. But the children still all had to go pretty much up in front. So then there was a choir loft and there were the local neighbors were, the choir was all neighbors from in the parish. So.
And when were you confirmed?
Oh, I'd say probably about 1957.
And you were how old?
7.
And when you were growing up, were you able to question religious teachings at all?
Not really. I mean, I was brought up as a Catholic, and that's what. And we went to church every Sunday, and it was basically what you learned is what we were done as the religion. So.
And what did your parents restrict because of religion?
Back, I guess, when I grew up, well, there was no meat on Fridays, and so outside of that, there really was no restrictions on anything.
And was Sunday dinner or supper different from other days of the week?
Yes, it was.
And how so?
Sunday dinner was usually a big kettle full of chicken noodle soup and either a ham or usually some big main dish, and then a big bowl of potato salad. And usually there was cake baked for the weekend meal. So
was it more food than what was normally made during the week?
probably a little more food as well as different things. During the week it was just plain meat and potatoes usually, but Sundays there was soup and everything added to it, and your cake or pies or something.
And what was a typical meal for a church celebration?
Well, everybody brought different, it was like potluck, and they were salads brought and sandwiches or a casserole of some kind, and desserts and pop for the kids, and just like I guess like a regular picnic. So.
And was German language used in church worships and prayers?
No, that was all pretty much English. At the beginning, it was Latin, and then it turned into English, and it was mostly English then.
Now, I'd like to transition a little bit and talk about holidays and celebrations. What was your favorite holiday growing up?
I guess Christmas.
And why was Christmas your favorite?
Basically, throughout the week between Christmas and New Year's, the family would always, my sisters would always try to get home throughout that week, and it was the meals and enjoying playing with the nieces and nephews. And you didn't get to see them too often, but whenever they did come, we had always a lot of fun playing games and picking on each other, teasing each other. So
And how did your family celebrate Christmas Eve or Christmas?
basically, from the time when I grew up, it was nothing all that much. After supper, the Christmas present was given to me, and I opened it, and I remember one year I got a little transistor radio, and that was my pride and joy, because I could take that and go out and feed cattle and listen to the music, and I really enjoyed that. That was one of my biggest Christmas presents that I can ever remember getting.
What were some other Christmas presents that you remember receiving?
Another one that I remember getting was a little caterpillar that it had a blade in front when you'd wind it up, and there was like a little red light on top, and it would flicker red, and it had little rubber tracks on there, and you could move it around, and that was also one of my favorite toys.
And how old were you when you had that caterpillar?
Oh, I suppose maybe around 10, 11. So I'd say probably 9, between 9 and 11 maybe.
And are there any Christmas moments that, in particular, that stand out in your mind?
Not so much really for me. I mean, it was just Christmas was Christmas back then when I grew up, and it was more or less just a little family get together. So
And would you go to church on Christmas?
I remember most of the time when I grew up, it was like Christmas Eve we'd go to church, like for midnight mass.
And what kind of food would your mother make during the Christmas holiday?
There was all kinds of baked goodies too, and she'd make cookies of various different kinds, and Zuckerkuchen, which was a German food more or less, and like I'm not even sure how it was made, but it was out of dough, and then it was like put in a pan and fried, and then she'd put like brown sugar or cinnamon or something on there, and it was always a German dish like that we had. So
Now, did your family celebrate Easter?
not as big as Christmas. I mean, it was just like a regular holiday, I guess you'd say. We went to church and came home and ate our meals. And if one of my sisters or we would get company, okay, but we didn't always have company for Easter.
And did you or your sisters ever get any gifts for Easter?
No. Well, little baskets, I guess we did get, but no gifts really. It was just like candy or something in an Easter basket. So
And was that always put out in the morning, or how would they do that?
usually at night when we were sleeping, when we'd get up, then we'd have to go and find the basket where it was at with all the candy in there. So
And what kind of candy did they put in there?
as far as I can remember, it was mostly like just chocolates or chocolate drops, and back then there were candy bar or something like that. There wasn't all these like gummy bears and all that back then.
Now, how did your family celebrate the 4th of July?
A big tradition when I grew up was to hoe potatoes on the 4th of July. We done that many, many years, I remember, because my dad really didn't care for rodeos or something. And the 4th of July, that was whole potato day. So
Were there any, did you ever take picnics or?
not really. It was not too much of any picnics that I went on with them.
What about games?
With,
The 4th of July,
no.
anything? It was a work
A
day?
few times I had a couple uncles and aunts that would come out and they'd bring like fireworks or something, and then we'd have fireworks in the evening, but they didn't come out every year either. The dogs would be scared and they'd be hiding in the barn or something, so a lot of times when they did come out with them, it wasn't always shot off that much and that early either, so.
Well, did your family celebrate birthdays?
Not so much birthdays, but my dad celebrated his name's day, which was the 3rd of December, when a lot of neighbors would come around, and then there was an evening of visiting and playing cards, and at the end of the evening, a big lunch was usually served, and there was other neighbors usually that had name's days too, so my parents would go to theirs, and they'd come to my parents' name's day, so.
And how would they celebrate it?
Just the regular visiting and playing cards and a little lunch.
Do you remember what kind of card games they would play?
Well, it was mostly whist.
And would your father ever receive any gifts on his name's day?
Well, his cousin one time gave him a gift that was wrapped up, and then when he opened it up, it said aftershave on the cream on there. And my dad just took it and set it down. And then during lunch, he asked him, "Did you ever open your gift?" "Yeah." Well, he told him to go in and get it and bring it out. So my dad brought it out, and it said aftershave cream on there. And then my dad's cousin said, "Well, open it and smell it." And when he opened it up, there was a pretty good sized spring. It was spring loaded with green material over it. It looked like a snake. And when it jumped out, it landed right alongside of my dad, and he looked at it for a while, and then he put it back in there, and my cousin was laughing like everything, or my dad's cousin was laughing like everything then, because he knew what he had in there, and my dad didn't want to really open it because he thought it was still just aftershave cream. So.
Did they ever do any other gag gifts like that you remember?
Not so much that I can remember.
Did your family ever participate in sausage parties or butchering, communal butchering?
Yeah, they helped a few other neighbors butcher, like Wendell Russell's, and she was the lady that taught me how to bake bread and all, and they helped butcher over there, and Wendell's butchered at our place, so.
What about other holidays like New Year's Eve or New Year's or Halloween?
Those were nothing of any special interest, and no special activities went on.
I'd like to talk a little bit about youth activities you may have participated in. What kind of pastime activities did you participate in while you were a teenager?
Basically, just like I said before, some softball games in the neighborhood where we got together with the neighbor kids, and in the evening, sometime over the summer, we'd play like kick the can, or over summer it was outside activity games, and in wintertime we played a lot of Monopoly and some other card games that the neighbor kids and I really enjoyed playing.
Did you ever go to the movies?
Not in my younger years, no. I'd say I was probably about 17, 18 years old till the neighbor boy and I used to come to Dickinson for a movie once in a great while. Not all that often, probably If we came once a month, probably, that was about all.
And what types of movies did you go see?
Mostly country western or comedy ones.
Do you remember any of them?
I remember some of them, but the actual name of them I don't. Well, there was one that I remember was called To Sir with Love, which it started as a school, bunch of kids in school, and the teacher, when the school year started, they didn't like him, and throughout the whole school year, they got to like him so much more, and by the spring of the year when school was over and graduation was, the whole class was crying, and they had a big party because they thought this was good. For the way he started, the way the school started for the year and the way it ended, it was such a big difference, and they cared so much for the teacher too, and which is part of it, which I grew up that way too. I had a couple of teachers in Kildare where I really enjoyed going to school with them, and I just talked to one here about 2 weeks ago, and I enjoy visiting with him now yet too. So.
And how old were you when you started dating?
First time, probably about 23.
And how are the customs of courtship different than they are today?
Well, basically the very first time I went out was we just went to a movie, and after that went for a pizza and visited a little bit and went back home again.
So that was basically a typical date?
Right. Back when I grew up anyway.
And during your young adult years, did you ever attend parties?
No,
What about dances?
not so much dances. I enjoyed sitting and listening to music, but I really never did care for dancing that much.
And do you know what the attitude of the older generation was towards dance halls?
Well, the older people, they enjoyed going dancing and all. My parents danced a lot too, but I just, growing up and being the baby in the family, there wasn't all that many opportunities to go dancing, and I really never did get into dancing that much. So
When you were growing up, was there a community place for people to socialize in town or the farm or school?
not so much, no. It was just when the neighbor kids would come over and we'd go to their place. That's basically we got to gather.
Now, I'd like to talk a little bit, move from dating and youth activities to weddings and traditions. How did you meet your spouse?
Her aunt called me one night. Her aunt knew my parents, and when she stayed at my aunt's place, and they called me one night, and I didn't have no idea who that was. I thought it was a prank phone call being pulled on me, and so when afterwards we hung up that night, I called my aunt, which before we got married was an aunt to my wife also, and I asked her if this person really existed. She said yes, she knows her real well. She's a real nice girl. Well, after that we talked on the phone together. I met her, or got to know her right around shortly after Christmas, and then we had a lot of snow and all, so I didn't get to see her till I think the first time I met her was the end of March. And by September, we got married. So.
And would you consider that to be an arranged situation? That it started out that way?
Well, I guess sort of, but really, they knew who I was, but I didn't know. Well, her aunt knew who I was, but my wife herself didn't know me either.
And what was your parents' attitudes toward?
My parents were both dead already at the time.
And when and where did you and Karen get married?
In Dickinson, St. Joseph's Catholic Church, September 20th, 1979.
And will you tell me a little bit about the wedding and the reception?
Yeah, it was, well, the supper was at the KC, and there was, I guess probably right around, I guess about 250 people there from both sides. We had music while we ate, but there was no dance for the after supper or nothing. It was just music while we were eating. So.
And what kind of music did they play?
Old time.
Do you remember any of the songs?
Not right offhand, no.
And what kind of food did they serve?
I'm not even sure. I think it was pigs in the blanket and ham, and then potatoes and all your relishes and all of that stuff.
Was there anything unusual about your courtship and or wedding?
Not that I know of. I mean, after we did meet in spring and were able to get together, well, when we decided that we were going to get married, well, I had to find a job and move to town, so then I had my auction sale and in the end of June, and then in beginning of July, I started working at that charcoal briquetting plant east of town.
And did you and Karen have a honeymoon?
No.
Was there anything else about your wedding that you would like to add? Any memories that you recall?
Just, I guess, well, one of the best man on my wedding was the neighbor boy, and I guess we tried to pull a stunt on him because he stayed at our trailer house night about the room, and he was always telling us how this isn't going to be fair. He's going to have to be all by himself that night. He wasn't married at the time, and my wife then had probably about a 3-foot doll, and we took it in and put it under the blankets for him, so that when he came home that night from the wedding, that he had a little wedding gift too. So
How did he take that?
he was quite. I mean, he laughed and enjoyed the trick that was played on him.
Alex, I'd like to talk a little bit about some historical events. I know the Dirty 30s were long past by the time you were growing up out on your parents' homestead, but how did the outbreak of the Vietnam War affect your family?
Well, back then I was right around 18 years old, and had registered for the service, and then was actually drafted, but then my dad was getting up in age, and so we went into the Selective Service Board, and my dad told them that if they're going to take me into the service, that he won't be able to do anything, and so one of the neighbors that was on the Selective Service Board recommended that I get a deferment, and so I never did have to go.
And you were 18 years old then?
Yes.
Did any of your friends get drafted and leave?
One of the neighbor boys, my brother to the one that was best man on our wedding, he ended up going over there. So.
Talk about healthcare a little bit. Can you tell us what kind of healthcare was available when you were growing up?
My parents really didn't have any health insurance.
What about visiting the doctor for any reason?
Very seldom. That if you said you had something, you were told to take an Alka-Seltzer or an aspirin, and that's what cured it most of the time. So.
Did your mother ever have any home remedies that she used?
Oh yeah, there was home remedies. I mean, if you said you had a cold or a sore throat, well, rub yourself good with Vicks, which I even do that up to today yet. So that's basically how I got rid of most of my colds. So.
And was anyone in your family seriously ill or injured during your childhood?
No, not that I can remember.
You never got hurt working on the farm?
No, I got hurt once in school,
And
but that was nothing all that bad. And it was in winter time, and they had we were playing games in the school, and the desks were all pushed to one side, and we were playing around on the other half, and one of the neighbor kids pushed me, and I slipped and slid into one of the desks, and the desk went into my ear. The corner of the desk went into my ear, and when I came home that day, my ear was all swollen. And, well, basically, my parents just said, well, you'll just have to, that's what you get for running around and getting into trouble. So it took a few days, but the swelling went down, and it was all okay again.
What would your mother say if you came home injured?
Oh, I'm sure my mother probably wouldn't have said all that much, but my dad would have had a few things to say because he depended on me for helping with the chores and milking and all of that. So then if it would have happened, he'd have had to go, and I'm sure he wouldn't have liked that too much.
And did you get any help for it when you were at school?
No.
And where was the closest doctor's office to you?
When I grew up, Dickinson.
Did you ever have to go in when you were a child?
Not that I can remember, no.
And during your childhood, did you ever visit a dentist or an eye doctor?
Not as a real young child, no, but I suppose I was in my teens already. I had to go to the dentist a time or two, and I had to put a few teeth pulled.
And what about the eye doctor?
Never really went to no eye doctor.
Did anyone in your family pass away during your childhood?
Well, I had a baby brother that passed away. He was an infant too. I think he was like 4 or 5 months old when he died.
Were you older?
He was older than I was.
And what was his name?
Frank Jr.
Discuss a little bit about the homestead again. Where was the closest town when you were growing up?
Killdeer, which would have been 15 miles to the northeast, or Dickinson, about 38 miles south.
And did you ever experience any isolation growing up?
No, just, well, if it was a few winters where it was a little bad. I remember one time when I grew up, we didn't get to Killdeer for 6 weeks, but there was always enough food in the house, so we made it without going to town. So.
And how did your family gain possession of the land that they were on?
Basically, from what I can remember, my dad always said that when he got married, there was that land had originally been taken back by the county because the taxes weren't paid on it because of the farmers back then didn't make or have much money, and so he went down to Manning to the county court and house, and he bought it for, I don't really remember what he had to pay for it, but back then it wasn't all that much money, but there still wasn't, you didn't make all that much money either, so.
And would you consider your family grain farmers, ranchers, or dairy farmers, or
Grain farmers.
farmers? And what buildings were on your parents' farm?
There was the house, and a barn and a granary, chicken coop, and the garage with a little shed on there, and then another granary.
And what about the types of animals that they had?
Cattle, hogs, chickens, dogs, cat.
Were you ever able to play with the dogs or the cats?
Oh yes, had a number of dogs that I was real close to, and one cat that a relative gave me, and I was real close to that cat to take him in summertime, and we'd lay on the floor and sleep. So
Do you remember their names?
the cat was Blondie, and the dog was Goldie, and Brownie.
Do you remember what kind of dogs they were?
German Shepherd and whatever other breed. I'm not sure.
And can you describe the roads to your family's farm?
When I grew up, it was a farm to market road, which had gravel on it, and I mean, if it rained a lot, then they got muddy. But back when my sisters were young, there was that gravel road that's there now was actually built in 1950 when I was born. Before that, there was just like county roads and all, and they got rather muddy. So, but after that, farm to market road was built with the gravel and all on there, and it was a lot better to get around when it rained. So.
Did you ever have any problems getting around on those roads?
Oh yes, I remember where it was pretty muddy and you'd slide around in the mud. So going to school one time on the school bus, we came down one of the hills sideways with the school bus. And there was quite a bit of rain that time.
And what kind of an experience was that?
It was a little scary. And I also remember one of the neighbors when they got married and out at the church, and we had quite a bit of rain for a few days before. And well, after the ceremony out there, the rest of it was in Dickinson, and there was such deep ruts on the road that the cars were dragging on the way in. It would get pretty muddy if it rained quite a bit.
Would that keep you all from going to town and getting supplies?
Yeah, if it really rained, if you were in town and it was clouded up, you tried to get back home, as well as if you did plan on going, you tried to pick out a day when it didn't look like it was going to be raining too soon when you did go to town.
And of course, you mentioned your family were grain farmers. What kind of farming equipment did your family have?
A smaller tractor with a drill and a disc, and a two-bottom plow, as well as a little cultivator. That was about a dump rake.
And where did they store these?
They were all in the yard, along the fence line. They were parked out of the way for the whole season. So.
And how often would you use them?
Yeah, seasonally every year when it was time for like planting the crops, you took the drill out, or cutting hay, you used the grass mowers, and then we didn't have no swather or nothing. It was just a regular grass mower. So then you had to take the dump rake and rake it all up. So
How long would that take?
for the whole haying season, I suppose about 2 weeks or so, because we had like sweet clover and wild oats for hay that had to come up, and then when it was cut and raked and stacked loose, we never had bales. It was all stacked loose all the time. So.
And can you describe the fields and crops that were on your family's farm?
Well, wheat fields and oats were planted, and then there was grassland safe for the hayland was safe to cut hay for the cattle for overwinter, and pasture.
And do you remember your neighbors?
Oh yes,
Who were they?
immediate close ones was Ed Svatenko. They lived a mile and a half north of the place, and I worked for him many years I started there when I was about 16 years old. I started cutting lawn there for them, and I was helping them fence, work cattle, and I basically worked there quite regularly almost every year. And then Wendell Russhouse to the south, and Ralph Hartman to the east. After my dad passed away and all, Ralph Hartman sort of became like my adopted dad. So anytime I needed help with something or something like that, he was a real good close friend. So I depended a lot on him for advice and help too if I needed it. So.
And did they ever look after you when you were younger and your parents had to go somewhere?
Not so much them, no. My sister was home till I was about 9 years old. So when she got married, so if there was anything, I had to stay with her. So.
And was neighboring a common practice when you were growing up?
Oh yes.
And can you explain how?
My parents went to a lot of the neighbors and played cards and visited, and a lot of the neighbors would always come to our place too. And there was not so much over summer when the work was, but in winter, in the fall and winter when there wasn't that much work, there was always some activity. And then my parents always played this a game called Aggravation, and that was with my dad's cousin and all, and my mom and dad played with them, and they'd always play men against the women, and they had a book every game was recorded at our house that was played. Every book, they had a book at their house, every game was recorded at their house, then they always compared who won the most games with it. So.
Who usually won?
I would say if you added it all up, it was probably about a 50-50. This time the men won, one night the men won more, the next night the ladies won more, so there was always a competition to see who could win the most. So.
And can you describe the game Aggravation? What was the point?
It was a marble game where you shook dice, and then they were partners, and whatever number you shook on your dice, you moved those, and your partners would try to kick your opponents off. If you landed on the same spot that you kicked them off. They had to go back and start all over, and basically it was just like I say. That's why it was called Aggravation, because you had to go around the whole board. When you got back to your place, you had to get them in, and you couldn't jump your own marble or anything. You had to get the right number to get in, and you'd probably sometimes be right there just ready to get in, and one of the opponents would come and kick you off, and you had to go start all over and go all the way around again. So.
Did you play it when you got older?
Yes, I did.
And what were the farm kids' feelings toward town kids?
I don't know. When I went to school, nobody really said that much about it. The town kids had their kind of lifestyle, and us farm kids, we had ours, and there wasn't really all that much said about it. It was just that when the school was out, they'd go, and I remember one time when I went to school that the buses didn't go home one night, and my parents had made arrangements that I stay with one of the families, and well, when we got out of school, they went downtown that day, and they had a little rec deal in Kildare, and we all went in there and we were playing pool, and this was something great for me because I never got to do something like this.
And what was your family's attitude towards the town people?
They had nothing wrong against them. They enjoyed visiting with them all too. So.
And what would you say the positive aspects of growing up on a farm are?
I guess you do learn to do many of things more on your own. I mean, you take on more responsibility, I think, because you got your chores to do and you're expected to have them done and get them done in a timely manner. Where town kids, well, I don't know. Back then, I guess if they had something to do or I don't know, but like I said, when I grew up, I was expected. I knew what my chores were, and I knew I had to get them done every day. So you just went and done them. So there was no questions asked or anything. So.
What were the negative aspects of growing up on a farm?
Well, like when I was milking, you were like tied down. You had to be there in the morning and in the evening again. So you couldn't. I mean, if you wanted to go do something, you had to make sure that you were home for milking time always. Same thing with your putting your crops and all out. When it was haying season, you had to be there to do it. And
Did that ever get tiresome?
not to me, no, because I guess I didn't do it all that many years, so it didn't really bother me.
And when you were younger, what social classes existed?
In school?
Social classes existed when you were growing up?
I don't really think that there was much of anything that I attended, so
Not much of a separation then?
no.
And what ethnic groups were included in your community?
Mostly German.
And what were the other ones?
There was a few Bohemian families around. That one neighbor was Russian, but his parents came from Russia too. But by the time I got to know them and all, that was the one that I worked for there. And they were all nice, real good, nice, friendly neighbors. So.
And what was your family's attitude towards the different ethnic groups?
They had nothing against them.
And were there places that your parents wouldn't let you go, or children they wouldn't let you socialize with?
No.
Alex, I'd like to talk a little bit about the environment. Can you tell us what it was like growing up on the plains?
I enjoyed it. It was different. I mean, living on the farm, every day you done your chores, and there was always something of excitement going on.
And what did you find beautiful or enjoyable about growing up on the plains?
You had your freedom. I mean, you go out in the country, and you go outside any place. There was no next door neighbor right close to you, so you could go out and do anything you enjoyed to do. So, or go for a walk, and the dogs always went with me or something, and it was an enjoyable time.
And was there anything that you found bleak or unpleasant about growing up on the plains?
Some of the winters, I guess, would have been because back then the winters were a little more harsh and rough than they are now, and a lot of times, like I said, I remember one time where we didn't get to town for 6 weeks. So, but that didn't always happen either. There was a year or two where it was a little rougher, and then there were some few better ones too. So.
And speaking of the winters, what were they like for you out on the farm?
Well, you had your chores to do. You had to go and milk, and then the cattle had to be fed, and you had to get your coal all in to heat the house up and all. So make sure you had your water carried and all. So there was always the water to wash the dishes, and any water that was used in the house had to be carried. So.
And where did that go?
That came from a spring. There was a spring about 1,000 feet away from the house, so it all had to be carried over.
And what kind of things would you do in the house during the winter?
Mostly just when I grew up. Then later on, there was TV. You'd watch TV, or my parents and I. My dad and I, as a younger kid, I had a plastic bowling ball set, so him and my dad and I would play bowling in the living room. But outside of that, there was just reading. I remember my dad would read out of some German books that he had, and he'd read the book, and then he'd tell my mom and I about the story that he was reading.
Was that a pretty frequent deal?
In wintertime, yes, that was just about almost every night deal that he'd be reading for a while.
And can you describe a typical fall?
You got your, after harvest and all, you start getting your coal all lined up and all mined or hauled in, and so that till it start getting cold out, that you had your fall work mostly done. I remember I had to help haul straw in so that it was bedding for the pigs and as well as for the cattle. So there was always your fall work. And if the season lasted long enough, then there was some fall plowing done and all after harvest was done.
And where did your family store all the hay that you used for the animals?
It was all right in the yard. It was stacked loose into hay stacks, and there was like 2 or 3 hay fences that we had. One of where my folks lived, one where my grandpa homesteaded, and then a few years there was a lot of more hay than others, so there was some extra hay fences. They were just, the stacks were moved in and then put on a certain area, and then we just built a fence around them. So,
And what were summers like?
busy usually, because they went in the spring when you put your crop out, then haying started out short. Well, summer follow, you do a little of that, and then haying started, as well as fencing, and we didn't bale no hay. It was all stacked loose. So then I remember some years earlier on, my dad and I would haul some with the hay rack, and then later on in the years it was stacked out in the field, and then the hay stack was moved in the fall of the year. So.
And can you describe a typical spring?
Usually in the spring after the snow would be more melted and all. We had to go, and we had our own fanning mill, so we cleaned our own grain and all at home. And by the time it was spring's work started, so my dad would go pull the machinery out and go through all of that and try to make sure everything was in good working order till spring's work started. But there was every once in a while a little breakdown that came along as you were working it.
And what was your favorite season?
I'd say, I guess, like fall.
And why?
Because it would start like cooling down, and I never did care too much for heat, and so with fall it would start cooling down. And wintertime, well, if the roads were heavy or something, you didn't get around much, and then you'd be home all winter long. And then in spring, when it would start getting nice, you had to go and start working spring's work. It was always the first few days to go back out in the field and all. It felt so funny because you had to get into something totally new again that you weren't used to for about 2 or 3 months. So.
And was that typical for every year?
For me, yes.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your family. I know we've talked about it a little bit before. Start with your father. Can you describe your relationship with him?
No, I would say very good. I mean, like I said before, he wasn't mean, but when he gave you a look, it was a stern look, and you knew that if you didn't want to get into trouble, you just listened right away, and it prevented and avoided a lot of trouble down the roads.
And what was his profession?
Farmer.
Always. And how did your father cope during the hard times?
I remember he told us many a times that he'd sure like to do better than he could, but there was a lot of hail, and first the drought hit, the early dirty 30s, and then after that there was about the time he always said that he thought he'd get ahead a little bit, and then the hail came and knocked the crop off, and there was nothing again, so you barely made enough to keep your bills paid. And I know he always said he'd sure like to do better, but when that's all that was left, that's all that was there. So.
And how did your father express emotions like anger or fear or love?
I don't really think that he did much of anything for anger, but love, I guess. I remember growing up where I'd get to sit on his lap, and he always wore bib overalls, and I remember every time I'd sit on his lap and lean back, when I'd get up, my hair would get hooked in the suspender, and that always hurt. And then sometimes when I didn't want to sit on his lap, well, why not? Well, my hair always get pulled on there, but it was nothing that he done. It was just that they got hooked in his suspender always. So.
Now, about your mother, can you describe your relationship with her?
She was a very happy-go-lucky lady, and I enjoyed her. I was only 18 when she passed away, but those years that I got to know her, I really enjoyed her, and she taught me a lot of things in life that I still do use some of those things today yet. So.
And what are some of those things?
Well, one thing she'd tell me was, if you're she taught me some of the things to like cooking and all, or like helping her clean. And well, if you're going to clean it, let's do a good job. You might as well, when you're going to sweep the floor, make sure you get all the corners and stuff like that to begin with. You won't get sent back to do it, and you'll be all done with it at once. So, as well as she had some scatter rugs through the house, and I'd always have to take them out and shake them for her. And well, you could do a good job shaking them, she'd say, and then you won't be sent back out to do them again, and they'll last for a long time. So.
And was it usually you helping your mother after your sisters moved out?
Yes.
And how did your mother express emotions like fear, love, and anger?
I remember I seen her cry a few times where if something, how could I just say it? Let's say, for example, like the hailstorm came or something. Well, there you seen your crop going again. Well, she knew as well as we did then there isn't going to be any extra money again this year. So I guess in a roundabout way, she would cry, knowing that it was going to be another year with not that much, but yet everybody hung together and tried to make the best of it. So.
And how did she express love?
I guess I remember sitting in the living room visiting with her and all. We'd sit around the table at night, and she was always like visiting with me too, and asking me questions of what I thought about how the day went, or when I went to school and came home from school, how my day at school went, and what did you learn today, and Do you think you learned something more and better today than what you learned yesterday or something like that? So,
And how did she cope during hard times?
how'd she cook?
How'd she cope?
Oh, cope. Well, it, like I say, she tried to make the best of it because back then there wasn't all that much, so the groceries were a lot cheaper back then than what they are now, but then they didn't make the money that they can make nowadays either because your wheat when you sold it, I remember, well, that was back in the 30s. My dad said that he sold wheat for 19 cents a bushel. And the cattle that were sold, they were like, usually like a 2-year-old steer would bring about $10. And if they sold a cow, they got 15, which, I mean, as we all know, that ain't all that much money. Yes, everything was a lot cheaper then, but you didn't get nothing for your stuff either, so.
And how many children did your parents have?
6.
And who would you say, you mentioned before that your parents weren't that strict, but who would you consider the more strict parent?
My dad.
And how would they usually discipline you and your sisters?
Usually, I was just told, I mean, you better behave yourself, and I expect you to behave yourself, and if we go to the neighbors and all, I mean, I was expected to behave at the neighbor's house just as good or just like I did at home. So, and like I said, I was never really spanked or hit or nothing. But my dad said if you go along and you behave yourself, and if you can't behave yourself, well, you're going to have to stay home. Well, I didn't really want to stay home, so I just grew up knowing that I had to behave. So.
And who would you say influenced your life more, your mother or your father?
I don't know. I think probably it was pretty much equal. Maybe as long as my mom was alive, I was probably did spend a little more time with her because he was out in the field a lot. But after she passed away, it was just him and I there. So I learned a lot from him too after my mom had passed away, which I didn't. Some of the stuff I knew, I learned things from him too. Then afterwards, so.
And how did your parents meet?
They met at a dance. There was some kind of a wedding dance, I guess, and my parents, well, they were both at the same dance, and through somebody, I guess, that knew my dad, they had told my mom to come to this dance, and that's how they actually met there too, I guess, and they started dating after that, and they got married then too. So.
And can you describe their marriage? Did they have a good marriage?
Oh yes, yes.
And how would you say, how would you describe it?
I'd say that they were very happy. I mean, considering the lifestyle that had to be led back then because of the shortage of money and stuff like that, they were both enjoyable, and they enjoyed what they did, and they enjoyed each other as well as I enjoyed being with them all the time too. So.
And what types of things did your parents do for pastimes?
Mostly visited with the neighbors or played cards, and my younger sister, when we grew up, there was a lot of like Monopoly play too and stuff like that in wintertime.
And is there anything else you would like to add about your parents?
Not that I could just think of. Like I said, I enjoyed the few years that I did have with my mom. Being I was 18 years old when she died, and by the time I would go to school and all, I mean, I didn't have all the opportunities that a lot of kids have today. The few years that I was with her, how can I say it? I had to actually stick almost a lifetime of being with my mom into a few short years, because when I went to school, by the time you came home, there was only a few hours left in the day, and by the time I'd really been able to enjoy her more, she passed away. And the same thing with my dad. I was, 23 when he passed away, so I've basically been on my own since I'm 23 years old. So
And speaking of that, you were alone because you were the youngest one
yes,
in the house. And I'd like to talk a little bit about your siblings. Can you tell me the birth order?
Rosemary was the oldest. You want their birth date, or?
If you know it.
Yeah.
tell me.
She was born October 4th, 1928. And then was Amelia. She was born May 20th of 1930. And then was Frank Jr. And I think he was born August 15th of 1931. And then Eleanor. She was born November 3rd of 1932. And Catherine was born March 3rd, 1941. And then myself, Alexander, was born November 2nd, 1950.
I almost shared a birthday with your sister.
Just about.
And can you tell me about your brothers or your sisters?
Well, it was mostly Catherine was the one that I got to know the best, because my oldest sister got married when I was 3 weeks old, as well as my second sister. I was about 2.5 when she got married, but it was Catherine and I was 9 years old when she got married, so I remember doing more things and enjoying things with her, because like with the other two, they're my sisters, but I didn't grow up with them, so.
And were they also born in the same hospital?
Catherine was born in Dickinson, but the other ones were all born at home. They were born in the house at home.
Was anyone present at their births when they were born?
I'm sure there was midwives back then.
What was, since it was just you and Catherine basically at home at that time, was there any competition between the two of you?
Not really. One thing which I remember, that in the morning after breakfast, she was helping my mom wash dishes and all, and my dad had gone in and we had just butchered, and my dad had gone in and laid across the bed to take a little nap till they were all done, and she walked over to the bedroom door and she looked in and she said, "Dad's coming." And I'd sit up straight and I wasn't doing anything, and pretty soon she walked over and she'd bang me on the shoulder and she'd look in there and, "Yep, Dad's coming." Well, you didn't want to disturb Dad from his nap, and I'd sit there real straight. Well, the third time she did it, I didn't look and he did come. and then I sort of got a little spanking because I was being pretty noisy. So, and I've told her that many a times. I said, "I still owe you a spanking today for me getting one that time." So,
Was that a common thing between the two of you?
yeah, we sort of picked on each other quite a bit.
What kind of mischief did the two of you get into?
Basically, I didn't get into too much mischief with her. Her and my sisters got into more mischief together than I think that I did with them. So.
And did any of them have nicknames?
Not that I know of.
Was there anything else you'd like to add about your brothers and sisters?
Not that I just know of.
Well, I know we mentioned earlier a little bit about some of the games you would play, um, both at home and at school. Um, how would the weather influence what kind of things you would do?
Well, in school, if in like the fall or later in spring, we played softball. But then when there was a lot of snow, well, like I said, we'd play like this fox and the goose game, or when it was real cold out, when it was below zero, well, we were confined to games inside of the schoolhouse, which back then it was like upset the fruit basket or something. All the students in there, you'd be given a name of a fruit. Well, then they'd probably like your desks were all put together. They'd say apple and peach. Well, whoever was the apple and whoever was the peach, you'd have to get up and try to switch chairs before the other one got to one. Well, you were always short one chair, so one got to sit down, one didn't. And every once in a while, there was hollered, upset the fruit basket. Well, then everybody had to get up and go and try to get a different one. So
Do you remember playing any games or activities that were brought over from Russia?
no,
Who did you usually play with?
mostly the neighbor kids
And were
and the nieces and nephews as they got older and grew up and came out.
were they pretty close in age?
Yes.
And did your mother or father ever play with you?
Not outside games, just like card games or something like that.
And where was your favorite place to play?
You usually we played in our yard, or a few times when the neighbor kids would come over, we'd go up to the church there and play in the churchyard because we had all the baseball bats and balls and gloves up there. So
And did you ever play with any of the farm animals?
yeah, the dog and the cat, and we had little pigs, and they'd be in that garage, and well, we'd always reach over the pen and we scratching them as they were laying there with the heat lamp on them. And one year, my dad really had some big pets with him, and then as they got a little bigger, we sold them. We had advertised them, and then when they came when this guy called us to come and buy them, well, we had him out in the pen that day, and he was, how in the world are we going to catch them? And my dad says, that won't be very hard at all. Well, how are you going to do that? So my dad went in and sat in the middle of the pen there. They all came around. My dad started scratching on them, and they laid down and rolled around. And my dad said, take the ones you want. So they were all pretty tame.
And how many pigs did your family have?
Usually there was like two of them that had little ones. And I'd say out of the two, we'd probably have maybe about 15 little pigs. So then they grow up, and in the fall they were butchered for our own use. And if we had a few extra ones, sometimes one of the neighbors or something would buy some. So.
And did you ever go hunting as a child?
No,
What about trapping?
no, I didn't either.
Fishing?
Fishing a little bit there was the little knife a mile to the north, a mile and a half north, and the big knife a mile south. I'd go fishing in the rivers there. You would catch like little suckers and perch and bullheads. I enjoyed going there more so than into the big water, because big water you didn't catch as much. Here you were always guaranteed to catch something. So.
And how often were you able to do that?
Oh, I'd say probably 3, 4, 5 times throughout the summer. We'd usually try to get a couple neighbor kids or something together, and we'd go fishing. So usually on a Sunday or something.
Yeah, when you were a child, did you have any favorite rhymes or sayings?
Not that I know of, not specifically anyway.
What about any superstitions or scary stories that you can recall?
Not really superstitions either, but I remember the neighbor kids were over one night and we were playing this kick the can game, which you took a can and set it at a certain place and one person was it. and you'd go hiding, and then you had to try to sneak back and kick this can before the one that was it would catch you. And we were playing. It was dark that night already, and we were playing there. And the neighbor kids were there playing, and I had forgot that we had this one gate shut, and one of the kids ran through the barbed wire fence, and she got cut up a little bit, but it wasn't all that serious. We just washed the sores off and put Band-Aids on, but that was about the worst. And a few times when my nieces and nephews were there, we'd played softball a few times, and you'd run and step into a rut in the ground. And one time I had a swollen ankle for a couple of days, and my dad wasn't too happy because he had to go get the cows for me to milk. So.
He didn't like that you were horsing around when you should have been.
Yeah, well, being he had to go get the cows, then next time behave yourself and watch what you're doing, don't get hurt. So.
And did you have any favorite songs as a child?
I guess when I grew up, like Wooden Heart, and then as I got older, there was some of the country western songs. I like country western music, as well as old time music too. I still got a lot of old time albums right now. Don't have time to listen to them too much, but I still probably usually once a year when I'm on vacation, I'll take them out and listen to them all. So.
And did anyone in your family sing or play musical instruments?
Just my dad played the accordion.
And were you encouraged to play an instrument?
I was told that, if I wanted to learn, I could, but I really never did.
Was there anything else you would like to share about childhood pastimes?
Not that I could just think of.
What would you consider your most stressful childhood experience?
I guess making sure that when you did play games or something that you didn't get hurt, because I grew up you didn't get to go to the doctor or something if something happened. You pretty well knew that if you got hurt, you had to suffer it out at home and get well on your own. So.
And what about your happiest childhood memory?
No, that was, I guess, playing the games with all the neighbor kids, and in the winter time playing all the card games that we did. And there was a card game that was brought back from Vietnam when the neighbor boy was over there, and we played many, many hours of that game. So.
And what was the most adventurous thing you did during your childhood?
I guess that one year when the neighbor boys, when they got their snowmobile, I had a pretty good sized. It was actually two sleds welded together, and we took some chain and chained it on behind the snowmobile, and we went out snowmobiling and through the pastures and all in the middle of the night, and we hit a few rocks and got knocked off the sled and all, but that was probably about some of the most roughest things that we tried to do.
Was there anything else about your childhood memories you would like to add with that?
Nothing that I could just think of.
Well, in conclusion, why do you think it's important to tell your life story?
I think so that future generations or kids can learn what it was like. Nowadays, they got all these games and all that they play on the video games and all of that. Well, when I grew up, there was no such thing. You had to go with your neighbor kids or your own sisters and brothers if they were, and you had to find your own games to play with. There was no place to go, and no out in the farm. You didn't have no place to go downtown or something to meet and play. It was basically you found your own entertainment of one way or another.
And are there any other thoughts or observations you would like to share?
As well as, like I said, back when I grew up, you learned how to work and do that stuff. Where nowadays, I don't like to say it, but the kids of today they don't like to work. They they want this paycheck, but they don't want to do too much for it. Well, you gotta, if you want to work and get something, you're gonna have to start working, and you start from the bottom and work your way up. You can't come off the street with these $15, $20 an hour jobs and expect to have what a lot of other people worked half of their life or three-fourths of their lifetime for. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves, I guess, that I have of life today. The young kids, they want to come in and start out with a lot of my parents and a lot of other people's parents worked a lifetime for. You gotta start from the bottom and work your way up and hope that everything goes all right, that you can accumulate things. You don't start from the top and try to go on like the kids do of today.